Ambedkar was also using the phrase, minorities when referring to the depressed classes. Okay. Of course, the picture changes in the 40s, right? But I don't want to go into that. Yeah. So, I'm very certain that a straightforward constitution which would reflect the sort of biases of the Hindu majority was going to be a basis for injustice for marginalized communities in India. And the only way in which this could be countered would be through the constitution itself. Okay, so the constitution, in some sense, was going to be the bulwark against Hindu majoritarianism. Okay, this is writ large in a lot of writings that Ambedkar has, and in some sense, Ambedkar is proved right when you think about the Hindu Code Bill and the debates concerning the Hindu Code Bill. What happens in the Hindu Code Bill debates in the late 1940s? Yeah, there is systematic sabotaging of the Hindu Code Bill by the stalwarts of the Indian National Congress. Your Madan Mohan Malviyas, your Rajendra Prasads, right? Rajendra Prasad was at that point of time just at the edge of becoming the President of India, was just on the threshold of becoming President of India. Okay, in fact, he reins in his objection to the Hindu Code Bill strategically because Sardar Patel tells him that if you make public your objection to the Hindu Code Bill, you will not become the first President of India. Rajendra Prasad agrees and does not actually make public his objection to the Hindu Code Bill. The Hindu Code Bill was one of the most feminist documents that we have ever seen in that specific era. I mean, if you just look at the text of the Hindu Code Bill and what Ambedkar had in mind, nobody in this room will object to women inheriting family property as much as men. I don't think a single person here will ever object to that. Yeah, but stalwarts of the Indian National Congress in the Constituent Assembly, right, down to the last, last luminary of the Indian National Congress objected to the Hindu Code Bill. Objected to the fact that women were going to inherit property rights. And that was not the only thing. I mean, there were so many progressive things that, gives me goosebumps to this day, thinking of marriage as a contract and not a sacrament. I mean, it's incredible. It is so progressive because a contract can be annulled, whereas sacrament is Sat Janmo Ka Sat. God has ordained, even if it is a deeply, if it's a deeply abusive marriage, okay, where the individuals are getting beaten up, etc. Even then, you are ordained to be with each other. Whereas to imagine marriage as a contract is a deeply progressive idea. And he was opposed. He was opposed thoroughly in the Constituent Assembly, Ambedkar. Yeah, discussing 4 clauses took 18 months. Not because they were being discussed threadbare, because they were stonewalling. You look at Shankar's cartoons from around the Hindu Code Bill, and you'll get a very good sense of the kind of, ideas that were being peddled at that specific point of time. Karpatri Maharaj was one sadhu who is now, of course, lost in the pages of history. But this Karpatri Maharaj challenged Ambedkar to a debate on the Dharma Shastras. And part of his public challenges, Karpatri Maharaj's public challenges, were that Ambedkar was a low caste Hindu. And how is it that a low caste Hindu, even though a law minister, is now seeking to interpret the Hindu Shastras? This was the basis uh, of his attack on Ambedkar. Okay, there were multiple public meetings that were taking place where Karpatri Maharaj was stating all of these things, right? In fact, Ambedkar is so bitter with the experience over the Hindu Code Bill that he decides that to hell with the Indian Parliament. You should read Ambedkar's resignation speech, for instance, in the Indian Parliament, right? To get a sense of the betrayal he felt at the hands of Nehru. Yeah, because Nehru was thought to be progressive. And of course, Nehru was being acted upon by Rajendra Prasad, who by that time, because of his strategic silence, had become the President of India. Yeah. So Rajendra Prasad was acting on Nehru on this side, and Ambedkar was saying, isn't it time to redeem our pledge, brother? What happened to the objectives resolution? What happened to the tryst with destiny? Okay, wasn't this part of that tryst with destiny? And Ambedkar resigns and leaves. And then you have the Hindu Code Bill cut up into 5 pieces of separate legislation. Okay, my lawyer friends here will know each one of these that was passed between 1954 and 1955, and the progressive elements in each of those laws was systematically removed. Okay, that's just I don't know. I think perhaps it was some of these developments which left Ambedkar, deeply philosophical towards the end of his life. And of course, D.R. Nagaraj, in The Flaming Feet and other essays, makes this claim that Ambedkar was so furious with constitutional, measures that he was beginning to approach Gandhi's sort of ideas in relation to change in society. This is D.R. Nagaraj's point. Nagaraj says, just to sort of paraphrase what Nagaraj is saying in his fascinating book, he says that Ambedkar Gandhi started life as a fakir. So Gandhi's point of departure was spiritual. That freedom would require a certain spiritual engagement with the self, with self-governance. Okay, that Swaraj would imply not just self-rule, but rule of the self. Right? So there was a certain sense in which Gandhi was saying that we would need to have a spiritual sort of an approach. And from there, of course, with engagement with Ambedkar, Gandhi moves to a constructive program. The Pune Pact is the middle point of that engagement between Gandhi and Ambedkar. After the Pune Pact, Gandhi moves to a more constructive program. And Nagaraj's point is that Ambedkar's trajectory is in the reverse. Ambedkar starts out with a constructive program, the Southborough Commission, for instance, or the Hitakarna Bahishkrit Samiti submissions to the Simon Commission in 1928 and so on. So Ambedkar's point of departure is with the constructive program. Okay, Pune Pact is the middle of that engagement with Gandhi. Okay, and after the Pune Pact begins Ambedkar's disillusionment. And towards the end of Ambedkar's life, he takes up more spiritual questions. So these are trajectories in reverse. Gandhi starts with a spiritual point of departure and ends with a constructive program, the midpoint being the Pune Pact, and Ambedkar starts with a constructive program, is disillusioned with constitutional reforms, is disillusioned with the Indian Parliament, and looks to looks to Buddhist philosophy for answers. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting sort of an argument which tries to otherwise bridge a divide between Gandhi and Ambedkar, which I think we shouldn't try and bridge because they were poles apart. They were ideologically opposed. We should look at them as being ideologically but then opposed. They continue to be relevant. This is in May 1928. Okay. And this is Ambedkar's report to the Simon Commission. We, of course, in mainstream historiography, we are only taught Simon Commission, Simon go back, Simon go back. But not everybody was saying Simon go back. Okay, these were very important sort of submissions that Ambedkar was making to the Simon Commission. Okay, that the education of the depressed classes shall be recognized as the first charge on the revenues of the province. Okay, in you now have, for instance, the Maulana Azad National Fellowship being withdrawn by the present government. Yeah. I mean, from 2015 onwards, if you followed what has happened, systematically higher education is getting defunded, particularly for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. If there are students who are availing fellowships to study abroad, particularly from the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, their research projects are being scrutinized, particularly if those research projects are critical of Indian culture. Yeah, so there is a certain there is defunding, plus there is also a censorship over the kind of research topics that can be taken up. That is increasingly happening. Yeah. Unrestricted recruitment to the army, navy and the police shall be recognized without any limitation as to caste, and that for a period of 30 years the right of depressed classes for priority in the matter of recruitments to all posts, gazetted as well as non-gazetted, in all civil services shall be recognized. I don't need me to tell you about the number of positions that still remain unfilled. Okay. You look at positions in universities, because I inhabit university spaces, look at positions that are still unfilled. NFS, right? Not found suitable. Okay, the bogey of not found suitable is haunting the interview panels of this country. Yeah, I mean, not found suitable, they're really, I mean, those are the ones where there should be inquiries, where you should have a right to information about those sorts of processes and procedures. Yeah. How can it be that you find candidates not suitable? Yeah. And yet again you find that the question of equality changes within the Indian Constitution. How then does the Indian Constitution deal with the idea of equality? And the way in which it goes about the idea of equality is that over a period of 40 years, it acknowledges the basis of inequality to be group subordination. Okay, so it starts out in the very first years of the institution of the Indian Constitution. It starts out with a colorblind notion of equality. Okay, let's just pay attention to this. This is basically the idea of formal equality. Everybody is equal and must be treated equally so that they have equal consequences. Yeah. This was the position of the Champaknam Dorairajan court in 1951. The Champaknam Dorairajan court was the one which struck down reservations, right? Champaknam Dorairajan was a Brahmin aspirant of a medical seat in the state of Madras, and she said that the Madras government's communal GO, government order, the communal GO discriminates against her because the communal GO of the Madras government, allocates seats in medicine to the backward classes, to socially and educationally backward classes. And the Madras High Court agreed. Said if you have Article 15 in the Constitution, then you can't have the communal GO. Okay, so this was the colorblind conception of equality, which the Supreme Court, accepted, and which immediately sent Ambedkar, Nehru, and Patel into a huddle. But how do we counter this? Because this was not the only challenge at that particular point of time. If you read your Granville Austin, for instance, land reforms were being challenged at that precise moment. His Royal Highness the Maharaja of Darbhanga had gone to the Patna High Court saying that my fundamental right to property is violated because of the Land Ceiling Act, because of the state wanting to appropriate land above the ceiling limit. And then preventive detention. Yeah, preventive detention was being challenged by A.K. Gopalan, who had been arrested for 3 speeches he had made. 2 before the transfer of power and 1 after the transfer of power. So in one fell swoop, preventive detention, land-related reforms as well as affirmative action were being challenged in the Supreme Court. And the court had agreed, saying that, if you have Article 15, you can't have reservations. Now, in response, Parliament amends the Constitution and introduces 15.4. And 15.4, I want to point out to you, is still not the group subordination conception of equality. 15.4 is still within the colorblind vision of equality. Allow me to explain. The way in which 15.4 is worded is to state that Article 15 is the rule with an exception built into it. So the rule is everybody must be treated equally, formal conception of equality, without looking into backgrounds of individuals. Okay? And if the government chooses to have affirmative action policies for socially and educationally backward classes, it can do so. But the primary principle is that everybody will be treated equally. Everybody will be treated equally because everybody is the same, and we will have reservations. So this was the conception of equality, where you had reservations in place, but it was within a color